He said I'd never make rent alone. I bought the apartment complex and raised his rent notice. On the day he said it, an eviction notice sagged from someone else's door, drooping in the rain like a paper tongue. I was carrying a carton of eggs and a bag of rice, and pretending my hands weren't shaking, pretending the red-stamped words on the neighbor's notice didn't feel like a prophecy. It was April, the month when wisteria drapes our fence in purple like a bruise. The stairwell smelled like last night's fish, and a hint of bleach. The bulb above Unit 3C buzzed, threatening to give out. "You'll never make rent alone," he said, leaning in our doorway like he owned the frame and the space inside it. He always leaned like that, Mason, with one hand in his hoodie pocket, confidence posing as casual. "Look at you. You're already counting pennies for eggs." I steadied the carton against my hip. "They're farm eggs," I said. "They're cheaper from Mrs. Boone." He smirked, his eyes flicking to the rain. "Cheaper than me? Good luck." Behind him, our apartment looked like it always did. 2 mugs crusted with coffee, a laundry basket of unsorted clothes tugging at a shelf, my laptop open to the spreadsheet I had been building in stolen late-night hours. Columns of dates and amounts and notes about expenses and bills, a flimsy ramp I was trying to build over a canyon. "We should talk," I said. "I'm late for my shift," he said and kissed me without looking, like a reflex, and the kiss missed my mouth. He pulled the door shut and shouted back through it. "Text me if the landlord comes by." We hadn't paid the full rent that month. We hadn't paid the full rent the month before either. We, of course, meant me. My name on the lease, my signature, my phone number on the landlord's voicemail. My stomach cramping when I watched the balance evaporate from my account. Mason loved to talk about partnership until it was time to split a bill. He loved to say we when he was laughing with friends, and you when the sink was full of dishes. By the time I set the eggs in the fridge, the sentence had already fastened itself to me like a burr. "You'll never make rent alone." I scrubbed a spot of coffee from the counter. The murky light through our window made everything look older. Maybe what hurt wasn't the sentence, but the ease with which he said it, the bone-deep belief. I knelt to collect a runaway potato and found the loose baseboard again, the one that hid the cash I'd been saving, $120 at a time. I slid it open and counted the envelope, $420. 21 crisp 20s. A ridiculous, timid dragon hoard. I texted Mason, "Let's talk tonight." He didn't respond. Around 6, the landlord did come by, after all, banging on doors with the back of his knuckles, the knuckles that had watched this building go numb one tenant at a time. He smelled like damp wool and cigarette smoke. "Rent was due on the 1st, he said to my doorframe. "We're the 9th. "I left a partial," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I'm starting a second job next week. Partial doesn't keep the lights on." His gaze flicked past my shoulder, as if he could catch Mason skulking in the bathroom. "If you're short, you should think about moving in with." "I'm fine." The baseboard felt hot against my ankle, as if it could blow our secret like a kettle. "I'm not moving in with anyone." He barked a laugh, not unkind. "Everybody's moving in with somebody these days." When he left, the stairwell didn't buzz anymore. The light had finally died. I stood there in the dim with my heart beating like an alarm, and the sentence echoed again. It wasn't prophecy. It was a dare. That was the night I untangled Mason from my life. I boxed his stuff, his vintage record player, 2 hoodies for t-shirts with skulls, a pair of sneakers with a skate shop logo, and the mug he called his, though I had bought it. I set the box by the door. I thought he would storm, but when he came home after midnight and found it waiting, he only scowled and said, "You'll come crawling back." He said it like a fact. He half laughed, half yawned, and fell asleep on the couch without asking where my side of the bed had gone. In the morning, the box was gone. The couch was empty. My phone chimed once with a text, "You'll regret this." Then nothing. The first night alone scared me. The second night tasted like a new toothbrush. The third night felt like space, real air in the apartment, air that didn't need translating. I ate rice and eggs, and the free bread from the bakery where I worked mornings. I took the late shift and the early shift at the diner 4 blocks from the laundromat and slept in the hours between like a cat between sunbeams. On the 14th, my friend Jaya came over with a thrift store lamp and a lemon cake and a hug that left flour on my shoulder. She didn't say congrats, she said, "What do you need?" "Time," I said. "And maybe a miracle." "Time I can't bake," she said. "But I can ask my uncle about extra shifts at the shop. And we'll find the miracle." 2 weeks after Mason left, I made the rent on my own for the first time in my life. It wasn't heroic. It was boring and hard. It was picking up a clip of hair from the bathroom tile and placing it in the trash. It was setting the envelope on the landlord's desk and asking for a receipt, my voice flat and calm like a lake before a storm. He blinked at the ask, then ripped a page, signed it, and handed it to me. Paid in full, it read, and I almost cried in the office that smelled like old leather and a 40-year-old carpet cleaner. I didn't cry. I folded the paper and slid it behind my ID in my wallet, as if it were a tiny shield that could cover my chest. The building didn't improve. The roof leaked in a polite way, only a little at the edges of the ceiling like a candle wax tear. The laundry machine's 8 quarters. The courtyard light blinked on and off as if signaling to ships that never came. Cockroaches made their tiny pilgrimages across baseboards in the night like devout monks. We were the same, building and me, patched, paid, stubborn. I began to learn the people in the other units. In 2B, Mrs. Boone with her farm eggs and multicolored scarves, who sang gospel while she boiled plantains. In 4A, twins who hurled their toy trucks down the hall like they were launching satellites. In 5D, an undergraduate who grew succulents in mismatched teacups and who once slipped a 10 under my door with a note. For the light bulb, if you get one before me. We were, despite the dead bulb and the bloated trash dumpsters, despite the landlord's old lady cough and his short, disbelieving laugh, a little community. Sometimes I saw Mason in the neighborhood, at the bodega buying cigarettes and a scratch-off, outside the bar where the door was always propped with a cinder block. He'd look at me and smirk and sometimes raise a hand as if to wave before thinking better of it. He'd moved into a building 2 blocks over, other side of the bus stop, with rusted balcony railings and an eviction paper that seemed to live permanently on someone's door. He lived on the 2nd floor. I knew this because I saw him smoking on the balcony. Once, a girl leaned out beside him wearing his hoodie, hair in a messy bun. He blew a smoke ring and watched it drift away like a wish he didn't actually want to come true. I stopped looking at him. I looked at numbers instead. Late at night, after my shifts, I would sit with my laptop and my scuffed mug and make columns. Rent paid, rent outstanding, cost of light bulb, cost of AA batteries for the smoke detector, cost of bleach for the bathroom, hourly wage tips once converted into actual, because tips are not money until they are money. My spreadsheet became a map that made more sense than the city. On my breaks, I read blogs and watched videos that said things like financial independence and house hacking and cap rate and debt service coverage ratio, phrases so confident they sounded like incantations. I watched a woman in her 20s on a stage talk about buying a fourplex with an FHA loan. I watched a man with a neatly trimmed beard insist that bigger wasn't always harder. I did not have a partner. I did not have money. But I had a rent history, a stack of pay stubs, and a stubborn math streak that woke up inside me like a long hibernating bear. One Tuesday morning, the laundry machine ate my quarters again, and I banged the side of it with my hip and said a prayer I'm not allowed to print. The machines were managed by a third-party company who never returned calls. Mr. Ree in 1A, who had been an electrician when he first came to this city, smiled and handed me a bent paperclip and showed me a trick to coax the door open. "The screws are stripped," he said. "The landlord won't replace it." "The landlord won't replace anything," I said. Mr. Ree leaned on his cane. "He's old. He wants out. He told me that last week when he couldn't squeeze past the dumpsters." "What?" Mr. Ree nodded. He said, "I should sell this place to someone young with better knees." I looked at the machine as if it had turned into a portal. "He said that. He tells me things," Mr. Ree said. "Because I listen." That night I slid a note under the landlord's office door asking for a meeting. He called me the next morning in a voice that sounded like gravel. "You're the girl in 3C, he said. "Always asking for receipts." "I am. You're on time now." "I like that." "Thank you," I said, and then, before my brain could begin to panic, "Mr. Fallon, are you thinking of selling the building?" Silence crackled on the line. Then he laughed the way old engines cough. "What would you do with it?" "Fix the laundry." "I would try." "You don't have the money for this." "I don't yet," I said. "But that doesn't mean I can't find it." He hummed. "I'll be in my office at 2. At 2 o'clock, my palms were damp against my jeans. My heart sprinted. The office felt like a time capsule. A calendar from a hardware store with a pin-up in overalls, a framed photo of Mr. Fallon standing in front of the building on the day he bought it, his hair black, his smile wide, his arm around a woman with copper hair holding a baby. The copper-haired woman had passed, he told me later. The baby had grown and moved to Oregon and didn't much like phone calls. The building was what he had left. And he was tired. "I bought this in '85, he said, tracing the frame's edge with a finger that trembled. Rates were different then. Everything was different. I was a roofer and thought I'd die on a roof. Then I did this and it saved me. He looked at me with eyes that were watery and sharp at once. Why would a girl like you want a problem like this? Because it's my problem already, I said, surprising myself. He had the decency not to flinch at girl. I thought of the night the stairwell bulb had died, the way the dark wrapped around me, the way I'd lit my phone like a torch. I live here. I know the leaks. I know who needs a payment plan and who needs a boundary. I know which kids draw chalk galaxies in the courtyard. And if you're going to sell it to anyone, sell it to someone who will treat it like a place where humans live, not a spreadsheet. He barked another laugh. You've been reading. I have. He drummed his fingers. I've had offers. Sharp kids in suits. Cash. But I don't want them to turn this into glass and steel and concierge dog washing. I want it to be apartments. For people with laundry and rent envelopes and chalk. The problem is I can't carry paper. I can't be the bank. What if you didn't have to be the bank? The phrase came out like magic words. I had practiced it in the mirror. There are community lenders. There's a CDFI down the road that specifically funds affordable housing and local buyers. They do below-market interest if you commit to keeping some units below a certain percentage of area median income. He stared. He may have blinked. You would do that? Keep some units affordable? I would, and I would put it in writing. My voice, to my amazement, was steady. I would take care of the roof, replace the laundry, fix the lights, and I would spend my evenings chasing down every grant with a comma in it. I'm not promising miracles, but I'm promising sweat. The office ticked with the sound of the old wall clock. He rubbed his eyebrow and sighed. Bring me a pre-approval, he said. Bring me proof of funds for a down payment. Do you know what the down payment is on something like this? I did. I had stayed late 2 nights in a row to read about debt service coverage and reserves and closing costs. The number was an elephant sitting on my chest. I'll find it, I said. You'll be racing the suits, he said. Bring me something real in 30 days. I walked out of his office shaking. The sky looked unnaturally bright, and the pigeons looked like messengers. I texted Jaya. What would you think if I told you I'm going to try to buy this place? She sent 5 screaming emoji, and then, I'd say tell me your plan. And tell me what to bake for the celebration. The plan was both simple and audacious. I made a list, community bank appointments, CDFI appointments, a meeting at the neighborhood nonprofit that ran small business classes, coffee with Rena, who'd bought a duplex last year and was the only person I knew who could say amortization without making it sound like a threat. I spent my breaks making phone calls that all started with different versions of the same sentence. Hi, my name is Amaya, I'm 24, and I'm trying to buy the apartment building where I live. In the first appointment, the banker wore a tie so wide it could double as a placemat. He nodded kindly as if I were telling him I wanted to build a raft and float to Spain. We typically look for more experience in property management, he said, and a stronger balance sheet. I have a spreadsheet, I said, and he smiled in a way that tried to be generous and failed. The second appointment at the CDFI was different. It was an office with a plant that wasn't dying and a poster of smiling people holding keys. The loan officer, Ms. Patel, listened all the way through without interrupting. She asked precise questions about the rent roll, the physical condition, the average rent per square foot, the tenant mix, and whether Mr. Fallon had any open code violations. She did not blink when I said I worked 2 jobs. That's still 2 income streams, she said. We like people who know how to hustle. At the end, she tapped her pen against the desk and said, We can't promise anything. But bring me 3 years of building financials, your own last 2 years of tax returns, and letters of interest from any investors you can bring to the table. The word investor sounded like a person in a suit with a watch that could tell the time of day in Hong Kong. But when I opened my contact list, investors turned out to be Jaya with her pastry savings, Rena with her duplex leftover emergency fund, Mr. Ree with his careful electrician's retirement, Mrs. Boone with a small inheritance from a sister she didn't talk about. It turned out to be me with my baseboard envelope and the guts to approach people I loved with a capital stack and a promise. 5% preferred return, plus equity, and an actual, written commitment to limit rent increases to cost plus 2% for long-term tenants, as long as we remained solvent. I drew it on paper. The equity sliced like a pie wedge, the debt sliced like the foundation under the pie. People laughed at my pastry metaphor. Then they nodded. I did not ask Mason. I did not consider asking Mason. I did, however, run into him in front of the bodega during the second week of my scramble. He looked the same, like a boy who hadn't figured out the distance between charm and responsibility. "Amaya," he said, blowing smoke. "You look busy." "I am. Got yourself a new situation yet?" He smirked like the word was a joke with a punchline he'd already told 5 times. "I do," I said. "I'm buying our building." He laughed, and the laugh unfurled into a cough. "You're what?" "The building. I'm buying it." He blew out a long breath and waved the cigarette like a wand. "Sure you are. You couldn't even make rent." I looked at him and felt something lift off me like a coat in heat, the heavy one you don't need anymore. "I could actually," I said. "And I did." He rolled his eyes. "You always were too proud." "Maybe," I said, because I had learned the glorious trick of not arguing on street corners. "Good night, Mason." I went home to my spreadsheets and my city paperwork, and the way the word escrow had started to sound like a place I might one day visit. In the 3rd week, Ms. Patel called with a voice like rain, a good kind list-making rain. "If you can bring 15% down and close a grant from the city's Safe Homes program for the electrical upgrades." Mr. Rhee would later cry quietly when I told him. "And if Mr. Fallon agrees to a modest seller note, we can do this." 15%, I said, my own voice like a paper bag. It's a lot," she said. "But your investors will cover half, and the CDFI can layer in a subordinate loan for 5% at favorable terms. The city grant isn't guaranteed, but our contact says you're a strong candidate. You'll need a property manager of record, at least for the first year." "I can learn," I said. "I will learn. You'll put it in writing that you'll preserve 10 units at 60% AMI or below for 10 years. "I will," I said. "Gladly." Then came the marathon. I ran from the diner to the city office to chase a signature. I coaxed a lost W, 2 from my old coffee shop manager. I signed documents with hands that didn't shake because adrenaline had given way to a stranger, colder friend, focus. I inspected the roof with a contractor who wore a baseball cap and said, "It's held this long. She'll hold another year if we baby her." I walked the property with the inspector, who pointed to frayed wires and said, "Good call on the grant." I knocked on doors and introduced myself. "We might have a new owner soon," I said, careful with my pronouns. "If that happens, I want you to know I live here. I care what happens to you." Some people were suspicious. Some people hugged me. One teenager shrugged and said, "Can you fix the laundry?" And we both laughed that laugh that knows how to cry. When the appraisal came back at exactly what Ms. Patel had hoped, fate with a calculator, I sat on my bed and breathed into my hands. When the city emailed the grant letter with the word awarded in bold, I ran down the hall and hugged Mrs. Boone so hard she wheezed, and then wheezed again laughing. We cooked plantains and sprinkled them with sugar and salt, and ate them over the sink. The night before closing, I walked the courtyard in the yellow light of the last flickering lamp and listened to the cicadas. A chalk hopscotch faded into the concrete like a map back through time. I put my palm on the warm bricks and said, "Tomorrow." It felt like making a promise to a person. Maybe the building was a person, maybe a chorus of people who had come through here, and loved and failed and learned, and left their keys on the counter with tears like small lakes in their eyes. Closing was in an office with carpet that tried too hard and a conference table that reflected my face like a pond. Ms. Patel was there, all crisp kindness, and Mr. Fallon in his suit that looked like it remembered a better day. There was a title agent with a stack of paper higher than my hope, and a pen that felt like a wand. We signed. We initialed. We spelled our names and spelled them again. Mr. Fallon paused over the last page, looked at me and said, "Take care of her." "I will," I said, and meant the building and the woman with copper hair, and the kid in the framed picture, and my younger self and every rent envelope I had ever filled. We shook hands. His palm was dry and cool. He handed me a ring of keys that looked like the keys to a ship. When I stepped outside, the air tasted like a new season. I called Jaya and screamed. I called my mother and listened to her oscillate between "my baby" and "be careful," like a metronome. I texted the investor group. Closed. "Thank you. We did it." I wrote to the tenants. "Please meet me in the courtyard at 6 p.m. for introductions, pizza, and a list of promised repairs." At 6 p.m., the courtyard smelled like melted cheese and hope. Kids ran in loops. Adults sat on the low wall, some with arms crossed, some with paper plates on their laps. I stood on a plastic crate and said, "My name is Amaya. I'm your neighbor in 3C, and today I became your new landlord." The word felt strange in my mouth. It had always meant someone else. "I want to tell you my commitments." I read from the printed sheet. Safety. Replace courtyard lighting within 2 weeks. Replace laundry machines within 30 days. Begin electrical upgrades within 90 days funded by the city grant. Affordability. Preserve 10 units at 60% AMI or below for 10 years. Rent increases will be cost plus 2% annually for long-term tenants, 2+ years. Except hardship cases where we can work out payment plans. Communication. Office hours twice a week in the old manager's office. Monthly courtyard meetings. Send me emails, not whispers in hallways. Respect, kids are kids. Nights are for sleeping. Noise travels. Write it down. We'll make a list and work it. We live here. I'm not here to flip this. I'm here to fix it. That means there will be changes. It also means I want you here. People clapped. Someone booed, loud enough to register but not loud enough to rattle my bones. Someone said, "Will the laundry eat our quarters?" And we all laughed again. Then Mr. Ree raised both hands and cried into them, and the twins in 4A ate plate after plate of pizza, and Mrs. Boone started a song and people joined because that's what happens when a building remembers it's a building. I went to bed that night with the keys under my pillow like a fairy tale child. The next morning, I put a note on the laundry door. New machines coming. Sorry for the wait. I called the electrician, scheduled the first phase. I ordered light fixtures online and spent the afternoon arguing with a supplier about bulk discounts. And I printed the rent notices. I had never written one. Now the form stared at me, and I stared back. I had promised fairness and math, not vengeance. I wrote the increases. Modest, mapped to expenses, less for long-timers, more for the short-term leases that had been written in a different market. For hardship cases, I wrote invitations. Please come talk to me, we will work it out. My signature looked like a matchstick compared to the thick lines on the bottom from years of other landlords. When I reached the name Mason Carter, my stomach did a somersault that ended with a smirk. He had moved, stupidly or ironically, into my building 2 weeks before closing, offered a move-in special by Mr. Fallon's management company to fill a vacancy. He was in 6B. I had learned this by accident, sorting the rent roll like a human-shaped algorithm. I could have taken him off my mental map. I could have asked someone else to deliver the paper. I taped the rent increase notice to his door like I taped it to all the doors. Identical format, identical font, identical math. His was higher than some because he had been paying an artificially low promo rent, and because 6B needed a plumbing fix that would require cutting into my budget to make it right. I stood there a minute after the tape smoothed down, not savoring, just breathing, listening to the hum of a building that was now my responsibility, not my revenge. He flung his door open like a negative miracle. "Amaya," he said, hair wild, a little gather of sleep in the corner of one eye. "What is this?" He held the notice as if it were a bee. "It's a rent notice," I said. "I know what it is. But what is this?" He jabbed the numbers. "You can't raise it this much. It's within legal limits," I said, evenly, because I had read the statute until the words layered themselves into my dreams. "And your initial rate was a move-in special. This aligns with the building's expenses and the going rate in the neighborhood. If this is hard for you, I have payment plans. You're doing this because of me." He looked down the hall as if expecting a camera crew to pop out. "I wrote these before I remembered you existed," I said. "I'm not interested in you, Mason. I'm interested in making sure the roof doesn't fall in and that the lights stay on. For everyone." He stared at me. For the first time since I'd known him, I watched his face reshuffle as if he'd been handed a script in a different language. "You can't be serious," he said, but the sentence drooped at the end. "Office hours start at 5, I said. "If you want to talk, bring your budget, and we'll look at it from both sides." I could hear my own heart. It was steady. "I have to go replace a light in the courtyard." He tore the notice in half, and the halves fluttered like 2 angry birds. Then he kicked them and went inside and slammed the door. The slam echoed down the hall and met its twin slam from the past, the one that had snapped me into action. I picked up the torn halves. I smoothed them and, because I am my mother's daughter, I folded them neatly and took them to the office. At 5 he came. His hair was combed. He had this way of straightening his shoulders as if he could press the world backwards. He sat on the folding chair and tried to lean like a man in a doorway, but the chair didn't permit angles. He looked at the spreadsheet I slid across the table. He blinked at the numbers. The bid from the electrician, the laundry contract, the price of a new roof if the old one quit early out of spite. He looked at his own numbers. The bar tab column, the grocery column with more chips than vegetables, the line that said savings, and then nothing. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "It's math," I said gently. "And it's choices." He slumped. For a moment he looked like a boy again, like the one who used to fall asleep at noon because he'd stayed up all night playing video games, like the one who laughed at my jokes in the library because he thought it made him look smart. The past brushed my skin like the ghost of a breeze. "You could move to a smaller unit," I said. "4C is opening next month. It's cheaper. Or I can give you a 6-month renewal at this rate, and if you pay on time, we can talk about a discount." I meant it about payment plans. But the number is the number. I won't make you special. I won't make anyone special. That's also fairness. He stared at me a long time. Then he stood up, pushed his chair in, surprisingly polite, and left. 2 days later, he taped a note to my office door. "I'll take 4C. I don't have to like you to admit you're doing your job." I snorted and stuck the note in my drawer. "Progress," I said to no one. That fall, the building changed like a season that had come on time for once. The new lights hummed. The new laundry machines did not eat quarters. Kids drew fresh galaxies, and when the first rain came, the roof held. The electrician took pictures of Mr. Ree standing by the new breaker panel like a proud grandfather. The city inspector signed off and nodded at me and said, "Good work." I slept an uninterrupted night for the first time in months and woke up grinning, disoriented by peace. Owning isn't a fairy tale. Owning is knowing exactly how much a water heater costs and what noise a broken belt makes. It's chasing a contractor who promised Tuesday and arrives on Thursday at dusk whistling. It's getting a call at 2 a.m. that there is water in a kitchen and arriving with a bucket and a wrench over pajamas. It's writing letters in plain language that say, "We are replacing your bathroom floor next week. Here's what to expect." In the halls and learning each door's sound, learning where the wall dips, learning who you can ask to keep the music down after 10 and who you have to remind 3 times. It is the exact opposite of an Instagram post. But in the middle of all that, there are moments like lightning not hurting anyone. Mrs. Boone inviting me to taste her new plantain recipe. The twins in 4A putting on a puppet show in the laundry room while their mother folded towels. The succulent girl from 5D leaving me a teacup with a sprig of aloe and a note that said, "For burns, literal and the other kind." There was an afternoon when 3 of the teenagers hauled lumber into the courtyard and built benches and asked me to paint them. There was a night when Jaya brought lemon cake again, and we all had it on paper napkins because the community room didn't have plates. There was a dawn when I watched the courtyard from the top of the stairwell with coffee in hand and thought, I did this. And by I meant we. And by we, I meant a building with 40 households, a lone officer, a retired electrician, a ghost of a copper-haired woman, and a tired man who had let go. Mason moved into 4C and stayed there, surprisingly. He paid on time after a single late slap on the wrist in January. He stopped smoking on the balcony, new rules, and started smoking on the sidewalk, old habits. Sometimes he nodded when we passed. Sometimes he didn't. Once he appeared at a courtyard meeting, hovered at the edge, and when I said any concerns, he cleared his throat and said, "The back stair needs a new board, the second from the bottom." And that was all. I fixed it the next day. A week later, he knocked on my office door and left a small donation for the kids' school supply drive. He still had his exaggeration problem. His stories ballooned like cheap balloons at a carnival and then sagged, but he kept them in his pocket now mostly. When he finally moved out 6 months later, he left a note that said no hard feelings. He had scrubbed the stovetop with a precision that felt like atonement. After the first year, I hired a part-time property manager to help with the hours I needed to sleep, and I shifted from 2 jobs to 1, the building. I learned how to file the property taxes on time with a checklist that made my brain feel like a puzzle satisfied. I met with Ms. Patel twice a year, and we sat with my aging laptop and her efficient tablet and looked at our numbers and our commitments. 10 units at 60% AMI stayed that way because of her watchfulness and my stubbornness. We even added 2 more to the affordable bucket when the city created a small tax abatement for owners who did. I kept my promise of cost plus 2% for long-term tenants, even when the market seethed with greed. I wrote a letter to our investors at 6 months and then at a year. Not a victory lap, but a long, clear-eyed walk around the courtyard. I sent pictures of Mr. Ree's breaker panel and the new laundry machines and Mrs. Boone's scarves hanging in the community room like flags from a country we were building as we went. Around that time, a reporter from the neighborhood paper asked to interview me. "It's a good story," she said on the phone. "Girl hostel city, young woman, big decision. We like these." It's not a movie, I said, but I told her she could talk to people and come to the courtyard if she brought a pizza. She asked me the inevitable. Is it true your ex said you would never make rent alone? Is this revenge? I looked at the chalk rockets behind her and the kid trying to draw Saturn's rings. It's math and love, I said. It's revenge against the idea that only people with parents who own buildings can own buildings. It's revenge against the story that we're supposed to accept what we're handed. I won't lie, taping that notice to his door felt like symmetry. I smiled small. But the notice wasn't for him. It was for the roof, the laundry, the lights. For me. For us. She printed the line about math and love. And my mother clipped it and mailed it to her sister and to me, and I tucked it behind the rent receipt in my wallet. We had a winter storm that year that made icicles along the eaves like the building was growing teeth. The pipes held because we had wrapped them in August like we were wrapping a present for our future selves. In spring, the wisteria bloomed so hard the courtyard smelled like honey. In summer, the kids built a lemonade stand and made a sign in crooked letters. Funds for playground benches. They made $32, and a woman who does yoga on the grass gave them 20 more just because. One night in late September, I sat on the bench we'd built and listened to the building breathe. Lights winked in windows at different times, like eyes going to sleep. Somewhere a pot lid clinked. Somewhere a faucet peeled off, then on. A radio murmured. It felt like sitting beside a large animal that had decided you were a friend. I thought of that first day again, the sentence slivered in the stairwell. You'll never make rent alone. I turned it over and laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't need to be cruel because it's too relieved to be anything but kind. I made rent alone, and then made rent with 40 families and a past I had survived and a future I had decided to believe in. The building had held me, and I held it like a bridge holds and is held by the shore. The night slipped deeper, cool on my arms. I walked up the stairs, and the light did not buzz, it shone. On my door, someone had taped a piece of paper. For a heartbeat, my stomach dropped. A reflex I guess you don't lose quickly. I tore it off gently. It was a drawing of me, stick figure with a bun and a ring of keys, drawn by the twins in 4A. Above stick Amaya they'd scrawled in block letters, boss of lights and laundry. Below, a second line, as if someone had floated down to whisper it to them. Thank you for our house. I stood there with the paper in my hand, and my eyes hot like the light behind them. I unlocked my door. I hung the drawing on the inside. I sat on my old couch, which had outlasted 2 different girlfriends of Mason's and 3 rent increases, and 1 ring of keys. I put my feet up on the coffee table where my first not-so-good spreadsheet had been born. I breathed. The building breathed back. I do not know if anyone ever makes rent alone. I think we make it with a woman at a loan office who believes in the way you add, with an old landlord who decides to be a person, with a neighbor who hands you a paperclip and a way to open a door, with a pastry chef who shows up with lemon cake at the right moment, with a retired electrician who cries in a way that makes you brave, with a kid who writes thank you in a shaky hand. Maybe we make it in the weight of keys on a ring and the promise we make when we slip them under our pillow. To do the work, to be the person we said we would be, to raise the rent when we must and lower our voices when we don't, to hold the line steady against the wind. A month later, Mr. Fallon sent a postcard from Oregon with a photograph of a mountain big as a story. I'm fishing, he wrote. Are you taking care of our girl? I wrote back and told him about the new roof, the light that no longer buzzed, the laundry that hummed. Yes, I wrote. I am. The night I mailed the letter, I slept the sleep of a person who had learned how to pay attention. I dreamed of keys, but they were not heavy. They sounded like rain on a good roof. I woke before the sun and sat with my spreadsheet not because I had to but because I liked it, the way the columns lined up, the way the story made sense in numbers. On the way to the office, I passed the door of 4C where Mason had lived, now inhabited by a woman with a toddler who toddled like a question mark. I paused, then kept walking. I had a stack of notices to deliver, routine, dull, the lifeblood of management. A reminder about the courtyard cleanup, a flyer about the back-to-school backpack drive, the agenda for next week's meeting to discuss the bike rack installation that had generated a surprisingly intense debate. I felt like a current, not a storm, moving, constant, not destructive. At the courtyard, the twins had drawn a new chalk planet. They named it after me, but I told them planets should have their own names, so they christened it Lavender, and hopped in a circle and sang something that made no sense and all the sense in the world. Mrs. Boone waved from her window and held up a plantain, question in her eyes. I nodded yes. The light shone in the stairwell. The laundry did not eat quarters. The building breathed. I exhaled. He said I'd never make rent alone. I told the air, not bitter, not triumphant, just fact. Then I smiled at the planet that was not mine and the bench that was and the light that was all of ours. He was wrong, I said. And because I had decided that my life wouldn't be about proving people wrong, but about building something right, I went to work. The end.